All right, everyone on Facebook Live, we're excited to have everyone here. It is a late night, 12:17, but the boys from Locked On are joining us, James and David. It is a pleasure. We do now know who the Buccaneers have added to their Super Bowl squad, and that is Joe Tryon, the defensive end out of Washington. He is pick number 32. And I first want to ask you, just what were your initial reactions when Joe was taken by Jason Light and company?
Joe is a name that we've certainly heard before, whether it's, mock drafts. Shout out to the Buccaneers' own Carmen Vitale, who, this is now 3 years running for her. She picked Joe Tryon for the Bucs in her first mock draft over there at Buccaneers.com, and she got it right a third year in a row. So edge is definitely a position we've been talking about. I think a lot of people have looked at. There's a need for some depth there. Anthony Nelson is a nice piece, but I think there's some questions on the outside of the franchise. I don't know how many questions are inside the franchise, but at least some of us out here, not really sure if we see Anthony Nelson as the future starter for the defense or not. So adding another player there, Jason Pierre-Paul, a little bit older, a few more injuries to tack onto his resume, and then playing on a contract year as well. The Buccaneers already have some money moving down the road. So are they really going to want to bring JPP back for another year? Is he even going to play another year? And then how are they going to handle the finances? So getting a guy like Joe Tryon in now so that he has time to develop is a really smart thing for the Buccaneers to do.
Yeah, and James, I want to ask you, how much are we going to see Joe in year one? Is this something where he can come in right away and at least be a rotational piece? Or is this somebody that you nurse for a full year and you let him flourish the next year?
I think he's definitely going to be a rotational piece in the defense. Shaq, Barrett, and JPP, as great as they are, they're human. They got to take a playoff every now and again. They're going to get tired chasing down some of these quarterbacks. So the Todd Bowles will work him in, start to get him comfortable, put him in situations where he's already good while they try to develop a few of these shortcomings. Tryon didn't play last year. He opted out of the 2020 season. So it's going to be a little bit of a process to get him back into football shape and to get him acclimated to the defense. But I think he absolutely will see the field, on quite a few occasions throughout the season. And I think the later into the season we get, the more we're going to see Tryon worked into these pass rush situations. And maybe Todd Bowles is going to come up with a way to get he and Shaq and JPP all on the field together.
Yeah, and that's the most exciting thing, right, is watching Todd Bowles have another year with this team and develop that defense even more so than what he did last year, which was a Super Bowl result. So adding this piece obviously fulfills a need, and we'll put that in quote, because they really were working with wants this year and didn't necessarily have to plug a specific hole, though this was certainly a position that we were all focusing on. Now, having said that, we'll get back to Joe Tryon and how he fits with this team, but looking at the board, I think we were discussing right before we got on here, there were definitely some other options we were looking at. Are there some names, David, that you were thinking, hey, I would really love them to take this person?
Yeah, I think staying in the same position group, I think Azeez Ojulari out of Georgia was a guy that a lot of people had probably higher on their board than Joe Tryon was. And the Buccaneers did their own evaluations, and they've been doing pretty well in the NFL draft as of late. So definitely not questioning their evaluations. But then you look at Christian Barmore out of Alabama. There were some rumblings, mostly social media stuff. Again, not really legitimate rumors, but wonder if the Buccaneers might package some picks, move up, and get a guy like Christian Barmore. But then he ends up all the way in day two. And then you also have some more, flashy type players. Elijah Moore is a name out of Ole Miss that came up a lot before Antonio Brown agreed to re-sign with his new deal. Now that he's coming back, the receiver position obviously a little bit less of a need, but hey, you can never have enough speed or enough playmakers on the field. So Elijah Moore, if he continues to slip and Jason Light does decide to get aggressive and move up, could be a guy in play. Liam Eichenberg is somebody that I know James is also really high on out of Notre Dame to add to that offensive line depth. So while they have no upfront needs, starting 22 roster needs, there certainly are some depth players still on the board. And Jason Light has been on the record saying in years past that he loves playing the draft game, the trade up, trade back, game. So, we could see anything happen with the Buccaneers starting as early round two.
Yeah, we know that Jason Light does love to trade up, as you mentioned. And James, entering day two, just what are some thoughts where you're seeing some guys out there? A, who do you like? And I'll ask you, who do you like in their position right now? But also, if there is an option to trade up, what are some of those names that you would like to be floated out there to say, hey, if they're around midway through that second round, sacrifice a pick or two and let's snatch them?
Yeah, I think if they stay at 64, you're going to start to see a little bit more of the hype and the buildup for the potential that they go after Kyle Trask to draft a quarterback, develop him behind Tom Brady. I'm not sure I'm 100% on board for that, but I understand how it would make sense. There's no pressure on him at the moment. He can develop, he can learn, and then he can slide in there as the potential starter if they move up. Like David just mentioned, I don't know how far Christian Barmore is going to continue to slip. You have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker out of Notre Dame, who, it would be great for Todd Bowles to get his hands on him. He's a guy that the Bucs could potentially move up for, or you could stay in Washington and get the defensive lineman in Awuzurike to line up there with Vita Vea, potentially replace Ndamukong after this season. So I would lean more towards they stay on the defensive side of the ball, but some of these offensive linemen that have slipped, we've talked about Tevin Jenkins, we talked about Liam Eichenberg out of Notre Dame there. That might be just too good of a possibility to pass up.
Yeah, and Landon Dickerson, also of Alabama, center is another position where I know that, hey, I mean, Ryan Jensen could be gone next year. That might be a position to fill as well. So they definitely do have some options, and that's the beauty of entering this draft. Jason Light talking about 8,000 scenarios to run through late in that first round. And going back to Tryon, physical specimen, 6'5", about 265 pounds, raw tools. And what he brings to the team now, I feel like you can start navigating into some other areas. James, just to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying at quarterback, I kind of agree with you. I do understand the want to get a quarterback. But having said that, we all agree that Tom Brady isn't retiring after the season. So do you really want to season a quarterback that when he finally gets into action, he's already on the back end of his rookie contract, and then you got to devote more money to him in the future if it works out? Not necessarily a commitment that I would choose early in the draft, maybe a little bit later. Guys, just some other thoughts coming off of this Tryon pick. Do you have a letter grade that you necessarily give them right off the bat? I'll start with you, David.
Yeah, I mean, I give it an A. I mean, I love it because you're addressing a position of need. You have some depth needs there, and then you bring in a guy that could potentially fill a future need. So, I mean, you're shopping for a problem before it ever even becomes a problem. You're plugging a leak before it actually springs. You know what I mean? So, whenever you can do that as a team, and again, winning the Super Bowl and bringing back all of your starters kind of affords you that luxury. But taking advantage of that luxury is a whole other story. So, I think the Buccaneers hit the nail on the head on this one. I mean, there's a difference between talent and skill. I think that's the big thing between college and the NFL. And Joe Tryon has all the talent in the world. Now it's on that Buccaneers coaching staff to teach first, which is what Bruce Arians talks about all the time, to develop those skills. And then, I mean, he's learning with Jason Pierre-Paul and Shaquille Barrett, two of the better ones to do it in the game in their careers. So, I mean, he doesn't have any better tutors to play with. And then Todd Bowles, one of the most creative and innovative defense coordinators. If they can't figure out a way for Joe Tryon to be successful in the NFL, then Joe Tryon just isn't made to be successful in the NFL.
Yeah, James, similar question.
Yeah, I agree with David. I give it an A. It was going to be really hard for the Buccaneers to come out of the first round without getting an A, just because they had a embarrassment of riches. They could do anything that they wanted to do. So really anything that they did, you could have made an argument for. It could have made sense. And they're going with a guy now who has a really, really high ceiling and can develop into one of the better pass rushers in the NFL, learning behind two of the best that are already in the NFL, with one of, if not the best defensive coordinator in the game. I mean, it's a slam dunk pick, because anything that they did was probably going to be a slam dunk pick.
That's a very good point, because we are kind of analyzing a team in unprecedented times, because no one has really brought back the amount of snaps that the Buccaneers have from a Super Bowl winning team. Yep. So the fact that Tampa Bay can actually get a year of a draft and just let it rip, it's tough to imagine that many teams have that scenario ever, where they're not at least thinking in the back of their heads, oh, I got to address a need, unless you're Jerry Jones and you just ignore the defense for 5 years, So it's amazing that, we can kind of frame it in a positive outlook out of the gates. I think that a lot of GMs, based on what we were seeing in mock drafts, it looked like a lot of GMs were trusting their gut on guys and maybe going a little bit higher to grab the person they wanted versus letting them slip and taking a risk to lose them later on. The only head scratcher for me was probably Green Bay on the night. Overall, I thought it was a pretty good draft. And moving into tomorrow, we are going to see what exactly Tampa Bay does. And I think both you would agree, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem like trading up should be the move. I mean, you can probably put that away towards early day 3, but Jason Light's already mentioned that it's tough to imagine that every draft pick is going to make this roster. They just don't have the money.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see the move up and go get a playmaker. The go get your guy is always the motto that people like to use in the NFL draft. And I mean, we talked about before, if Najee Harris fell all the way to 32, it'd be really hard to turn him away. I think even though you have a pretty strong running back stable, and then you have one that most NFL teams would be envious of course, he ends up going to the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is a beautiful fit for that young man. But when you look at day 2, I mean, Javonte Williams, depending on the premium that people put on running backs, if he ends up somehow there in the middle of the second round, I mean, I think it'd be really hard for the Buccaneers if they're presented with the opportunity to package some picks, move up, and get a guy who is kind of a little bit of a lighter version of Najee Harris. In my mind, Ronald Jones again playing on the last year of his career, and really that entire running back room is almost on 1-year contracts. Again, in 2022, the only guy you have locked in is Keyshawn Vaughn. So adding Javonte Williams may not seem like the most obvious move, or even any running back in the second round, the most obvious move for this season. But again, having the time to groom them, finding a role with them or for them in this season while you do that, and then potentially unleashing them next year as your starter would make that pick seem a whole lot smarter in 2022.
Yeah, and bringing up running backs important, because that's the beauty also with the Bucs, is that if they don't necessarily address it this year, they're just kicking the can to next year where it does become a need, versus this year where they can try and get the person they want. Maybe Trey Sermon would be another dart I would throw a little bit later in the draft if they wanted to go that route. But I do agree that Javonte Williams is probably the one dude I would be willing to trade up for if that is something that they are really dead set on.
Right.
Outside of that, I mean, I'm going to put you guys on the spot, just throwing a dart. If you had to pick a second rounder tomorrow, who is your thought on the Bucs?
Wow. Somebody that could sneak into the back end of the second round there could be another guy out of Ohio State, and that is center Josh Myers. I think he would be a fantastic fit. He can learn behind Ryan Jensen. He provides depth at both center and at guard. He played both. I've seen him projected as high as the mid-second round. I've seen him projected as low as the late third. So if he's sitting there, it makes a lot of sense for the Buccaneers to address depth at 3 different positions. On top of that, if he pans out as a guard, you're talking about Alex Kappa being on the final year of his deal. You could groom him. He could become a starter there at the guard position. Ryan Jensen, he's on the final year of his contract. So you have a guy that you can plug and play at 2 different positions that you could take at the back end of the second round.
Yeah, I really like him as well. And I'm going to throw out Quinn Miners, Wisconsin Whitewater. He's a guy. I got to go to Mobile this year to the senior, the Reese's Senior Bowl there. And he was a guy that jumped off the field and got a lot of praise because, those small school guys, it's hard to tell how much of their performance is really natural ability and skill, like we talked about, skill and talent, and just the fact they're playing against, lesser competition. And when he got around those bigger school guys, he looked comfortable, he looked confident, and he looked dominant. And then you saw him throughout the practices, and it's hard to show a lot of growth in just a couple of practices, but he's one of the guys that really stood out. So already showing that he's got the capability to take NFL coaching, turn it into performance on the field, and execute it. That's huge for a guy like him. Jason Light is not afraid of small school guys. Buccaneers fans love Ali Marpet. Quinn Miners could be another guy. And look, he's played center, he's played guard. So if Ryan Jensen isn't in the cards for 2022, I think we all kind of hope he is. And I think Tom Brady would probably want him back for at least that year if that is his last ride, instead of going with a younger center. But I mean, if it's not in the cards for Ryan Jensen to come back next year, then Quinn Miners, again, getting that redshirt year essentially in the NFL to develop even more with NFL coaching and development would be a really smart pick on day 2.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that the Buccaneers have no fear taking those small time guys, and he was somebody that definitely got a lot of publicity in his time there in Mobile. Just for me to throw it out there, I'm not gonna pick one, but I'll pick 2. One of the 2 safeties between Elijah Molden or Trayvon Merrick. I like both of them. I think both can can enter the rotation immediately and be pretty successful. If there's an injury, they can step in and make sure things are running smoothly. So that's my choice. And again, when everybody's out there looking at mock drafts, just at this point, now it's going to kind of be a little bit all over the map. We were talking a little bit of where Tryon was. We've seen it as high as 33, as low as 75. That's where development comes in, and that's where the Buccaneers are going to have some time to nurse their prospects. So, they can go out and they can take some of these raw athletic talents and know that they don't necessarily need to be perfect in year one, which is the rarest of rare feats in the NFL, because usually it's you got to produce now or we're moving on. Well, we will move on to tomorrow, and hopefully a lot earlier in the night than what we were doing tonight. But I appreciate you guys, James and David. They will be back on tomorrow at the end of day 2, whenever that is. So if they do trade up and they sacrifice that third round pick, we will be on a lot earlier. Again, you know where to find us if you're listening to us. But please check out Locked on Bucs. Tremendous content. They are pumping it out every day for you, and they are locked in. And we are going to continue this partnership for a long time. So this is our first go around on the Facebook Live. I'm excited to get to know you guys more and to do this more often. And let's do it again tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.